Today's daf is Be'ez Hashem Avodah Zarah daf Ches, number 8, and we're going to begin from uh, about like 9 lines on daf Zayin Amud Beis. The Gemara just said before, if the Gemara is now going to say something very interesting. The Gemara says before that this person called Nachum Hamadi, we seem to, everywhere he says an opinion, we always don't paskin like him. We say it's a rogue opinion. So the Gemara says he was such a great person. Um, are we gonna? Is there one way? Is there one place we're going to paskin like him? So the Gemara says yes. The Tanya. Here we go. It's about like 10 lines from the bottom. The Tanya we learned in a brisa. Zayin Amud Beis. Here we go. Let me make it bigger. The Tanya we learned in a brisa. Nachum Hamadi Ayman. Nachum Hamadi says, Shoel Adam Tzrachov, if a person has a personal request, you could interrupt your Shemoneh Esrei and say it b'Shemei Tefillah by Shema Koledi. So there we paskin like you could interrupt your tefillah, even though it's not part of the davening, not part of the Anshe Knesses of Gedola's established version of Shemoneh Esrei. You're making up your own words. You could ask your personal needs request in that bracha. Amar, so he said to them, Bar Minai Dahi, that is an exception where we will paskin like Nachman Mondi. The Talia Ba'ashle Rav, he's hanging on a branch full of grapes, on a big branch. In other words, that he's not the only one that said this opinion. There were Chachamim that agreed with Nachman Mondi. The Tanya we learned in a brisa. Reb Lezer says, let's say you're up to starting Shemoneh Esrei. You're just davening Marav right before you're starting Marav. Right before you start the Shemoneh Esrei, Reb Lezer says, Shoel Adam Tzracha. First, you say whatever you want. Then v'achakach yispal, and then say the text of the Shemoneh Esrei. Shenema, the pasuk says, Tefila la'oni chiyatev v'lefnei Hashem sichoi. Sicha l'tefila shenema v'yetzi yitzchak l'suach basada. So first, tefillah, you say your own personal prayer, and then afterwards, you before God, you spill out the textual tefillah. So that's where Reb Lezer learned that you don't ask your personal opinions during Shemoneh Esrei or after Shemoneh Esrei. It's prior to you starting Shemoneh Esrei. That's when you should ask your personal needs. Rabbi Yeshua says no. Yispalel. First, you say the text of the Shemoneh Esrei, va'achar kach yishol srachov, and then you should ask your personal requests. Shenema, the pasuk says, Eshboich lefonav sichi, I'm going to spill before you my thoughts, sarasi lefonav age. First I say the tefillah, and then I tell you, God, about my distress. So first you say the text of the Shemoneh Esrei, and then at the end of the Shemoneh Esrei, you say your needs. Says the Gemara, Reb Lezer nami eksiv Eshboich lefonav sichi. What does Reb Lezer do with Reb Yeshua's pasuk? It seems that you're supposed to first pray first, and then ask for your personal requests. So Reb Lezer is going to say, Hachi kama, after I told God my problems, then I'm ready to say the text of the Shemoneh Esrei. That's how Reb Lezer is going to learn that pasuk. Rabbi Yeshua also Rabbi Yeshua, what does he do with Reb Lezer's pasuk, where it says say your personal prayers first, your personal request, and then say the Shemoneh Esrei. This is what it means to say. When do you say your personal request? If you're already davened already. That's how Rabbi Yeshua is going to learn. So, you can't bring a raya from the psukim because you could twist the psukim, each one according to their opinion. So what is the essence of the machlokes between Reb Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua? Mind you, Reb Nachum Hamadi is not like each one of them, but we're going to see that in a moment. Like Rabbi Simloi made a speech. A person should always express the praises of God and what God does without anybody requesting anything from him. And we do that by the Birchas Avos, at the Gibor, at the Kodesh, and then you daven your personal, you daven for what you're requesting for. How do you know that? Moshe Rabbeinu, we learned it from Moshe. Moshe had a personal request. He wanted to be forgiven so he can go into Israel. So first Moshe Rabbeinu says in his prayer, Hashem Elokim ateh kolois laharis avdecha. He said about God's praises. He began to discuss God's praises. Uksiv Basrei, and then after he said, afterwards he said, Ebernov Eres Haaretz HaTaiva. Then he requested from God to see the great land. So we see you say God's praises first, and then you take your personal requests. So now, how does this all fit in? So Rabbi Yeshua Sava, Rabbi Yeshua learns Yalfinim and Moshe. We learn from Moshe Rabbeinu. First, you say praises of God, and then you say your personal requests. First say the Shemana Esrei, and then say personal requests. Rabbi Lezer Sava lo Yalfinim and Moshe. We don't learn from Moshe. Hoshani Moshe was different. The Rav Guvrei, he was a great person with great intelligence and great achievements under his belt. So therefore, he has a wider mind, so to speak. So for him, it's best for him to praise God and to expand on the praises of God, because he understands God better than the average person. But a regular person, before he starts praising God, it's disrespectful. You don't even know who God is. So just ask your requests, and then you say the text of the Shemona Esrei. The Chachamim is exactly what Nachum Amadi says. Loy kedivrei zev, loy kedivrei. They don't say, not like you should say your request before Shemona Esrei, or say your requests after Shemona Esrei. El shoyel adam tzarachav b'shemei tefillah. You ask your personal requests during the Shema Koleinu. That's the Chachamim's opinion. Amar Rav Yehuda, Rav Shmuel bar Sheil Shmei the Rav. Even though we said even though we said that you should ask all your requests during Shemei Tefillah, but it's not only by Shemei Tefillah. If you have a personal request in one of the brachas that we say, you could say, for example, if a person is requesting intelligence, so you should ask a personal prayer in Atachoinen. If a person has a request for parnasa, and before he finishes off Mevarech Hashanim by Baruch Aleinu, he should say, God, please give me parnasa. That's what Rav said. Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar Rav said another thing. Even though you say your personal request in Shemei Tefillah, the one exception is if you have a personal request, it really should be in the following brachas. If you know of a personal sick person in your house, a family member, then you say, especially hirotzoid in rafa'enu, requesting refuah for that a family member. If you personally need parnasa, don't wait to Shmei Tefillah to ask that. Ask that in Birchas Hashanim by Baruch Aleinu. But other requests, let's say if you have a request, you want to nothing to do with parnasa or anything or refuah, you could ask that personal request in Shemei Tefillah. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, Alpha Pisha Amr Shalodam Tracha b'Shemei Tefillah. Even though we said you could ask Shemei Tefillah, even if you requested, but then you after Shemoneh Esrei, you just don't want to leave the Shemoneh Esrei. You want to ask God about this and that, every tiny little thing that's going on in your life, like the whole Yom Kippur Al Chet. You have a whole thing after the Shemoneh Esrei. God doesn't mind nudges, and you can stick around and ask anything you want. But during Shemei Tefillah, apparently you should be as brief and to the point as possible. Now Mishnah continues and said, "Ve'elu idein shel goyim." The following are holidays of the goyim that we said 3 days prior. You're not allowed to do business with a goy. Kalanda ustarnura ve'kiratesem v'yoim genusu yishel malachem. The coronation of the king, the Yom Haleda, and the day of the king that was born, the Yom Hamisa, and the day of the death of the previous kings. All these things were holidays by the Goyim, and as a group, as a community, they would be makriv, they would bring sacrifices to the deity. Div Rameir, so says Rameir. The Chachamim says, not every king, on the death of the king, the anniversary of the death of the king, did they call it to be a great holiday that they bring sacrifices to Avodah Zarah? If the king, they burnt his personal items, so then he was a special king, then on his day of death, then they serve their idols. V'she'ein ba sreifa, if it's a type of king that wasn't so special, that they didn't burn his personal artifacts, ein ba kol avodah zarah, then they don't serve avodah zarah because apparently he wasn't such a great king anyway. Now, this is regarding community holidays, but there's sometimes a personal guy would have a holiday. So for that guy, you're not allowed to do business with. Now, what are personal holidays would a guy celebrate for himself? And he would bring sacrifices to his idols. The day that the guy shaved his beard, or his locks or his ponytail behind his head, the day that he was saved from the ocean, from the sea, that his ship capsized and he somehow was saved. The day that he left jail. And the goy she'asta mishal of a goy that made a wedding for his son. Those are special days that are usher to that particular guy. But nevertheless, you're not allowed to do business with the guy that day, and only that person. But that person, because there wasn't a 3-day gezerah because it's a personal holiday. Zok the Gemara, what is Kalanda? What are these community holidays in Rome? Alma Rav Chana bar Rava Kalanda was Ches Yomim Acher Tkufa, was after the winter solstice, a few days afterwards, 8-day. It was an 8-day holiday. Starnura was Ches Yom Lifnei Aktuna. Starnura, which is the second one in the Mishnah, actually was an 8-day holiday prior to the solstice. The Simonach, if you want to remember, Achav v'kedem tzartane. The first God formed the back of Adam Rishon and then the front. So we explaining that what comes after Kalam that came after the winter solstice, and then we explain Star Nura, which came before the winter solstice. Because what we're going to learn now is why are they celebrating prior to the winter solstice and after? Because really, after was always a holiday. But then, prior to the winter solstice, became a holiday. Now, what's this holiday all about? Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, the first man saw Yom Shemismayit v'Hoylach. The days were getting shorter. Omar, he said, Oili, oh boy, Shema b'shvil shesrachti, because I messed up with the Eitz Hadas, Oilam choshesh ba'adi, the world is getting darker and darker. The chayzul toiv and the Big Bang is going to collapse in on itself. V'zohi misa shenikdusar laimin shmaim, and maybe this is the death that God punished me with. Amad v'yashav ches yamim b'tainis u'b'tfilah, 8 days of tanis and tefillah prior to the winter solstice. Kevan shara to kufas tevis v'rosh yom marach v'hoylach. After the winter solstice, a few days later, the days starting to get longer. Amar, he said, min halgish el. This is the way the world is. Halach v'asa shmani yom tayvim. Then he made it 8 days of Yom Tov right after the winter solstice. L'shana Cheres, the next year, Austin le'elu Yom Tovim. Both days he made it for Yom Tov, prior to the winter solstice and after the winter solstice. Who called him L'Shem Shemaim? Adam Rishon made these holidays for the sake of God. V'heim, his offspring, Kavum L'Shem Avodah Zarah. They made it to worship idols on those days. So the Gemara says like this: Bishlam l'man diyama betish. This story makes sense with Adam Rishon. Betish nevaolam yom mezuta chaze yom erika kati chaze. Since if Adam Rishon was created in Tishrei, he only saw the days getting shorter, but he never saw the days getting longer. El l'man diyama benisan nevaolam. If Adam Rishon was created in Nisan, hachaze le yom mezuta v'yom erika. He saw the days getting from short and getting bigger and bigger. So what was he nervous about? And says the Gemara, as it was getting smaller, it got smaller, started getting smaller after the summer solstice in June. The Habazuti Kulahai Loichazi. He never saw it get so short the days, so that made him very nervous right before the winter solstice, right before the Kufais Tavis. Tana Rabban, the rabbis taught, Yom Shediv Rabbi Adam Rishon, the day that Adam Rishon was created, Kevan Sheshaka al Chama, as soon as the sun set, Omar, he said, Oili, woe is to me, because I messed up with the Eitz Hadas, Oilam Choshech Ba'adi, the world is going dark. And the world is going to turn back into destruction. Maybe this is death. In other words, the first day that Adam Rishon did the sin, it started to get dark. That was on a Friday. He was fasting the rest of the Friday. Uboichin crying, kol halayla. The Chava boicha kenegdei. The Chava was crying next to him. So Friday afternoon is considered a day of tshuva. Kevan sha'al and Friday night. Kivan sha'al amar shacha. The next morning, Shabbos morning, the sun rose. Amar, he said, min hagish l'oilamu. That's the way of the world. Amar v'hikrev shar shekanav koidim l'parsaisav. He was makriv the first ox, the ox that God created, that the horns came before its foot, but came before its hooves. In other words, God, when He created the ox, created it as a mature ox. So He created the head of the ox first with its horns, and then created its body. That was what that's what Adam Arishan used as his sacrifice. Shenama betita mishar par makrim mafris. V'yama the Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Shmuel said another thing. Shar shehikriv Adam Arishan, that ox that Adam Arishan was makriv to the Eibishter, Karen achas haisad loy b'mitzcha. It had one horn coming out of its forehead. I don't know what the significance of that is, but that was what he used as a sacrifice to thank God that he was forgiven. Shnema v'sitev l'Hashem mishar par makrin mafir. So this ox had a makrin, had a horn. Says the Gemara, makrin shtein mashma. Tarti masha. Doesn't that pasuk imply that it had two horns because it's plural, makrin? It's written without the yud. So it's almost as if it indicates that ox had just one horn. So that was the ox that Adam Arishan sacrificed. So the Gemara says like this: Amar Rav Matana, Roimi she'asas kalanda. Let's say the city of Rome that celebrated kalanda. The chol yores hasmuchus la mishtabis law. The question was, there's little towns around the city of Rome that you pay tax tribute to the city of Rome, but they don't celebrate the kalanda party, the kalanda holiday. Oisin yores asuris or mutaris. Are they asur or is it mutter? Because we're going to say that since they are subservient to Rome, maybe what you do business with them, they're going to bring it to the people of Rome, and the people of Rome are going to bring it as a sacrifice. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amar, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Kalanda asur lekolhi. Kalanda is also to weather Rome itself and all the villages around Rome. It's only asur to Rome that serves this kalanda, that celebrated the holiday, but not to the surrounding towns. Tana kavos Rabbi Yochanan, the Brisa appeals to Rabbi Yochanan. Afal pishamar Rome asa kalanda v'chol yara smuchas la mishtab la hiyatzma einen asura ela la'ivdel bilvad. Even though we said that Rome that made kalanda, and all the cities pay tribute to it, but the Isser of doing business was only in Rome, not to the cities around it. We saw this in the Mishnah, that if a guy made a holiday for a simcha for his child, so it's only asur on that day and that person. Amar Rav Ashi says, Afanan Tanina, we learned exactly like Rabbi Yochanan. Yom teglachas the kanoni balarisoi, the yom shalom ben biniyam, the yom shiyotzim beisu asurim, ein asa ela oisa yom, bilvad v'oisa ish. The personal holidays for an individual guy is only asa for that person and that day. Bishlam oisa yom, it's only asa that day to do business. That excludes that you're permitted to do business with that particular guy. If he's going to have a personal holiday, you're allowed to do business with him the day or two before and the day or two after. If it's a personal holiday, obviously the only one you're not allowed to do business with is that person. What my love, it's including lapuke mishubadav, even though this person has people that work for him. So you might think that you're not allowed to do business with the people that even work for that person that is going to celebrate a holiday. Shema Mina. So since you don't have to, it's only that particular person that's making the holiday, and all the people who are servants of him, you're allowed to do business with. Same thing with Rome. Rome celebrates the holiday of Kalanda, but all the towns around it, even though they pay tribute to Rome via taxes, since they're not celebrating Calendar, you are permitted to do business with them. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Shmuel taught, Yisrael shebechutz la'aretz oivdei avodah zarah b'taharaheim. The people of Chutz la'aretz serve idols b'tahara. B'tahara, I think, without any intention in their heart. They just do it by rote. Ketzad, goy she'asa mishtalev nai v'zimin kol yehudim shebe'iroi. If this, how does this play out? If a guy made a wedding for his son, and I've been by this, and he invited all the Jews of the city to come to the wedding of his son, and the wedding is in a church. Even if the Jews bring their own food, they bring their own wine, they bring their own Jewish waiter. The pasuk compares it as if they're eating from the food slaughtered for avodah zarah. If the guy invites you, and you're eating from from what he slaughtered. So the Gemara says, maybe the Torah only asked you only if you partake in his food, and if he gave you kosher food, but he paid for the food. Amaravim came nema kra v'chalta mezivchai. The Torah could have said, okay, the problem is you're eating from his food. Mai v'kara lecha. What does it mean? He invited you. Mishas kriya, from the time that you were invited, and then you decided to bring your own food. The Torah compares it as if you're eating from his party, and as if you're partaking in a party that was made for avodah zarah. Hilkach, therefore, we go to Amid Beis, called tloisu yom. This doesn't just last for one day. The people would serve their idols for many days. So kol tloisu yom, any 30-day party after the wedding, let's say he invited you and didn't tell you that it's because I'm celebrating the marriage of my son or my daughter. Also, you're not allowed to go to his party. After 30 days, if he tells you the party is for the marriage of his son, even if it's after 30 days, you're not allowed to go. And if he doesn't tell you that he's because of his son's party, that it's because of the marriage of his son, then you're permitted to go. Because if he still thinks it's celebrating the marriage of his son, probably he's going to offer up a something for the idols. Says the Gemara, if he keeps telling you that he's making a party to celebrate the marriage of his son, how long do we never attend his parties? Till 12 months pass. If after 12 months pass, even if he tells you, I'm making a party to celebrate my son's marriage, already it's over a year, so he's already cooled off from sacrificing anything to the idol during that party. So you're allowed to attend that party. Nowadays, as long as the party is not made to a church, and if you need to go to a goyish wedding, there are people that say you can. From before the wedding of his son, when are you not allowed to attend a party? When he started making beer, preparing the beer with the barley, then he's already excited about the wedding, the upcoming wedding. So even if he makes a party during that period prior to the wedding, you're not allowed to attend. But if it's after 12 months, if he makes a party, you're allowed to attend. For Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rabbi Sharshia, went to a guy's house for a party. It was after 12 months of the person's making a wedding for his son. So it was a party that occurred a year after the goy made a wedding. Ushamei the oide, and he heard that the guy is thanking his deity for the marriage of his son. Uperish, then he stopped and didn't eat. And so why did he eat? If it's after 12 months, he could have partaked in his food. Presumably, Rabbi Yitzchak brought his own food. Rabbi Yitzchak, he's a special person, and people should not. He should not have attended that party. He felt bad attending that party. Now we're going to learn for another 2 more minutes, and then we'll stop. So the Gemara says like this: "My Kretesim. What is this Kretesim holiday? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Yom Shetov Saboy Rami Malchus. It's the day that Rome took over the world. Frank the Gemara Vatanya, we learned in the Brisa, Kretesim, the Yom Shetov Saboy Rami Malchus. Kretesim was one holiday, and then there was another holiday that Rome took over the whole world, became a superpower. Rav Yosef says, state tfisa tafsa rabin. Rome had two grabs at becoming a superpower. Achas, one was b'mei Cleopatra Malkasa during Cleopatra the queen. Achas shetofsa b'mei Yavonim, and one when they had this great war against the Greeks. That was a time that was also a big grab, where they became also at that time known as a superpower. The Chiyas Rav Dima Omar, Drimi used to say, for 32 years, the Romans fought the Greeks and they couldn't overpower the Greeks. They made a treaty with the Jews. Rome made a treaty with the Jews, and they said that if we win this war, we'll make you into a king, or we'll give you special high posts within our new government. And this is what they made a treaty with Jews. If we become the king, you'll become the governors. If you're going to become the kings, we're going to become the governors. In other words, they said that please join us in this campaign against the Greeks. And the Romans sent to the Greeks and said, you know who's on our side? The Jews. Till now we did it with war. Now we're going to do it in righteousness. In other words, now we're going to win this war. They used an example, a parable. If you have a pearl and a diamond and a precious stone, which is the base? Which do you use as a base, as a setting for the precious stone? You use the lesser value. The pearl will become the base for the diamond. If you have a diamond versus a ruby, which goes on top? The diamonds on the bottom becomes a base for the ruby. But let's say you have a ruby and a Sefer Torah. You Greeks, which would you say goes on top, the ruby or the Sefer Torah? So the answer is the Sefer Torah. Inach, the Sefer Torah. The ruby is a base for the Sefer Torah. So even the Greeks recognized the power of the Jews with the Torah. So they sent back the Jews are on our side. The Romans said the Jews are on our side, and the Sefer Torah was his. So they went to war against the Greeks and they won. So for 26 years, they kept their promise to the Jewish people by giving them high posts within the new government. But after 26 years, they started making the Jews more subservient to them. Did they have a source for it in the Bible and to conduct themselves this way? And says the Gemara, yes. Concludes the Gemara, Mikara Darsh, in the beginning they darshan Nisav and Elcha Nagdecha. When Yaakov and Esav, Yaakov represents Jews, Esav represents Rome. The Pasuk says, Esav said, Nisav and Elcha Nagdecha. Let's go together, travel together to Seir, and be side by side. In the end, Yaakov said, you're too fast for me. You go front and I'll be behind you. So to come about. So that's it. So they will stop over here. But basically, so we see from there that the Romans kept their word for 26 years. But then afterwards, they said, oh, Yaakov was always going to be behind. We're supposed to be on top. And then they put high taxes and made the Jews more subservient to them. But in order for them to win the war against Greeks, they had to make a treaty with the Jewish people. Okay. A good Shabbos, everybody.